Welcome, everyone, to the 17th edition of the Baxter County Roundtable. Tonight, we're going to have a discussion on the previously held teletown hall with Senator Tom Cotton. We're going to have discussion between uh, Jason Nazarenko, state representative for District 3,
District 4.
District 4. I knew I was going to get that wrong. And Chris Chamberlin, who is the chairman of the Baxter County Republican Committee. The teletown hall was held last Thursday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Last Thursday. It included telephone calls from Sharp, Izard, Marion, Fulton, and Baxter counties. So it was quite a reach across the whole north central Arkansas. That being said, Chris Chamberlain did the introduction with Senator Tom Cotton, and I'll turn it over to him for a minute here and let him discuss what they talked about leading up to the town hall.
Well, I'm afraid it wasn't that exciting. It was mostly technical details about how we were going to proceed, and that was pretty much all we did. Of course, I introduced Senator Cotton with a biography of how he came to be a senator and the various things he did before he got there. And then I asked the first question, which we are going to roll here in a few minutes.
Okay. You got anything you'd like to say leading up to it, or just want to get with it? Or
we can get with it. I thought it was a great interview, great way to get some information out to the public. So appreciate that. Looking forward to this.
Good deal. Well, that being said, Gary, if you can roll the first question, we'll get right into it.
So the first question tonight is dealing with something that is affected us all. We've all been dealing with the shock of Charlie Kirk's assassination and worrying what it means for the future of this country. Just over a week later, what are your thoughts about where the state of politics is in America, and what can we do to carry on Kirk's message in a positive way?
It's a welcome question. It's a sad one given the circumstances. I think any decent American was shocked at the cold-blooded, calculated assassination of Charlie Kirk last week for his political opinions and activism. I'd offer a few thoughts. First, I think maybe the most immediate and important thing anyone can do is to pray for Charlie's family. He has a young widow now who has 2 young children that are not going to know their dad except through video, and ask the Lord to protect them and look after them, in addition to Charlie's extended family and all those who were touched by his life. Second, I think it would be a great testament to Charlie's legacy to get your kids and your grandkids more involved in conservative politics, whether they want to come to your county committees, whether they want to form a teenage or a young Republican group, maybe they want to join or even form a new Turning Point chapter. Charlie's main mission was to try to help Republicans win the youth vote, to help persuade young Americans that conservative principles are what made this country great and what will keep this country great. So I think it'd be an important testament to carry on his legacy by continuing that work. Third, I would say, as I've told my fellow senators, we should reject the claims that this is a both sides problem. This is not a both sides problem. This is a problem of left-wing violence almost exclusively in America. Charlie Kirk's assassination, the attempted assassination twice of President Trump, of Brett Kavanaugh, of Republican members of Congress at a congressional baseball practice a few years ago. You had left-wing assailants who attacked center-right figures because of their political views. That's simply not very common in reverse. I know the media cites things like Paul Pelosi, which was a terrible attack on an elderly, innocent, defenseless man, but it was done by a homeless schizophrenic. The terrible murder and attempted murder of 2 Democratic state legislators in Minnesota, again, done by a delusional Tim Walz supporter. The attack on Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania that set the governor's mansion there on fire, done by a left-wing pro-Palestinian activist who thought Josh Shapiro was too hawkish on Israel. So the media narrative that this is a problem with both sides is simply not the case, and we shouldn't accept it to be the case. I mean, maybe the simplest way to put it is, when George Floyd died, you had Democrats burning down major American cities rioting. When Charlie Kirk was assassinated in cold blood, you had prayer vigils, and not a single store or storefront had to be boarded up anywhere in America. There have been lots of Democrats, some of the Democrats I served with, who have put out very compelling, very moving statements about how wrong this is, about how wrong what happened to Charlie Kirk is. Bernie Sanders put out a very good statement. I'd encourage you to go look at it. I commended Bernie for it this week, and suffice to say, I don't commend Bernie for much. So this is not something that you should blame the entire left on, or anyone who voted for Kamala Harris, or the Democrats in your communities. That's not fair. But it is the case that political violence in America is almost exclusively left-wing violence. And the president has made it clear that he's going to lead serious investigations, not just into Charlie Kirk's assassin, but any accomplices, co-conspirators, networks that might have been funding or radicalizing the murderer, and people like him. You saw what he said about Antifa and declaring it a domestic terror organization and using the full power of the Department of Justice against it. I commend him for that, and we should support him for that. He's going to get a lot of criticism. He's going to need a lot of support.
So, Jason, you want to weigh in on that first?
I think it was a good first question, that went out there to Senator Cotton, and I do appreciate his answer. I agree, that family definitely needs a lot of prayer. And what I'm really happy is we as a community, if you remember last week, we talked about the community outreach right here and our memorial for Charlie Kirk, and
Yep.
Baxter County Republican Committee's part in that, had a huge part in that. Just a great event. And I mean, we were able to see the data from that. We talked about it beforehand, but 1,400 people, when you look at those numbers, that was over 50% from right here in Mountain Home. So some of the others were the other communities, but that just shows like what a great community that we have that supports that. I look at, as Senator Cotton mentioned, how can we keep that momentum going? What can we do for the youth? And we've got some great programs already started. There's a Turning Point Faith is meeting every Sunday morning at 9:00 over at Twin Lakes Baptist Church. ASU Mountain Home has got one. I don't know their time, but they're meeting over at the college. I've heard of another one that's popping up as well, and that's what we need. And I've talked with others that are interested in, hey, let's get one that is not necessarily affiliated with one certain church.
Right.
Let's get it to where, everybody can get involved. And I think that's a great idea too, to where that way it's not going to be limited by people feeling like, hey, we're going to lose our youth to this church, because that's not the point. The point is getting the information, the youth, getting it into their hands so that they have the truth. They have that information that Charlie Kirk was pushing out there. And we know, Charlie Kirk was a great patriot. He was a great Christian, and his goal, was to not only, as far as further Christianity, but his goal was to also make sure that those youth are understanding those good conservative values, those good conservative, the rhetoric that's out there, which debunks everything on the left side. And that's what we need, is we need those truths to get out in the hands of the youth, so that they aren't just getting indoctrinated by someone else.
That's right. He really pushed for the youth to register to vote.
That's right. He did.
At virtually every one of his events, he had a voter registration booth there and was really pushing for the young people to register to vote. So, Chris, what do you got?
Look, I thought it was a great answer. He hit the high points, particularly from the moment Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Every mainstream media pundit, from Piers Morgan to Jillian Andrews, I believe, we're talking about how it's a problem on both sides. They tried to push that narrative early and often and hard to try to tell us that political violence is just as bad on the right as it is on the left. And that's a lie. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely a lie. And we've seen that in the 2 weeks since Charlie Kirk was assassinated, almost 3 weeks. How many incidents of violence, how many deaths have there been in the last few weeks due to left-wing, mentally unstable folks who have come out shooting? So I think that was a great answer that really emphasized, and that's something that just cannot be forgotten, cannot be emphasized enough. This is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing problem. This is what Charlie Kirk stood for, was talking. And I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed in the last 10, 20 years, really, that liberals don't want to talk anymore.
No.
They'll try to shout you down. They'll use rhetorical fallacies. They'll lie. They won't just discuss policy in a logical fashion. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised when that failed. When talking fails, the last resort is violence, and that's where they went. And I think it's going to continue unless somebody on their side changes something and begins changing what the marching orders they're giving their people. It's just going to keep going.
Well, and we've seen just in the last 48 hours the rhetoric coming out of Washington, D.C. with all the Democratic leadership there that, they're right back into he's a fascist, he's a Nazi, he's this,
Yeah, that's right.
Just continuing the same rhetoric as if nothing has ever happened. And then just in the last 48 hours, we've had a crazy drove a truck into a Mormon church and set it on fire and started opening fire on people. And then another crazy over in North Carolina, pulled up in a boat and started shooting, and killed, I think there's 3 people the last I saw. So, the whole thing is until we turn our eyes back to the Lord here and start getting closer to the good Lord, it's not going to get any better.
Agree.
So let's move on to question number 2 there, Gary.
We will get started with Job Hurst from Mammoth Springs. You are live to ask your question.
Yeah, I'll try to make it short and quick. I just curious what you might possibly be working on to do to help Arkansas farmers struggling right now. I know several Arkansas farmers struggling with this drought in northeast Arkansas, and so curious about that. But also curious if we might actually, sometime soon have an in-person town hall meeting. And that would be it for now.
Yeah. Joe, thanks very much for the question. I can tell you it's on not just my front of mind, but on John Bosan's front of mind. Fortunately, as some of you know, John is the chairman of the Ag Committee, so he's working on this actively, and I'm supporting him. Frankly, almost every Republican senator as well. We all have large farm sectors in our states. Arkansas obviously has one of the biggest. The big beautiful bill did happily include the 2 main parts of a traditional farm bill, the risk management programs for our farmers, as well as significant reforms to the food stamp program to make sure it's going to those who truly need it, not to illegal aliens or deadbeats or layabouts who refuse to work. However, as you know, as anyone who's in farming knows, that doesn't kick in until next year. And I think it's going to be good for our farmers next year, but it doesn't pay the bills right now. It literally doesn't pay the bills right now as loans come due. So I'm very mindful of that as a Senator Bozeman. We are kicking around a bunch of ideas that perhaps Congress could legislate in the next few weeks, working with the USDA, where we have many friends, to include some of my former staff, to see what they might be able to do. I know their lawyers are looking carefully at different possibilities. If the Congress doesn't legislate, say, some kind of payment support, that USDA perhaps could find a way to give loan forbearance, loan forgiveness, foreclosure moratorium, or so forth. But I promise you, it is very much front of mind for Senator Bozeman and me, and really every Republican senator. I'll give you an example. We just spent the month of August at home in our states, and I got back to Washington, and I was having a dinner with 4 other Republican senators, about 20 or 25 attendees, and they wanted to know what was happening in our states and what was on our minds. And I was the 4th senator to speak, and three senators in front of me all raised this very question that you raised about what we can do to help our farmers through the end of this year and until the Farm Bill kicks in next year. I, of course, added my voice as the fourth of four, but it just gives you a sense of what a high priority it is for me. Hope very much to see all of you in person sometime soon. Like I said, we're somewhat constrained by the Senate calendar and also by the unpredictability of it. This is a good example today. Typically, we're done by Thursday afternoon as people try to catch flights home, but we're going to be here voting at an indeterminate time tomorrow and maybe through the weekend as well. Also, it's always the case that I've found when you have a new Congress with a new president, you just spend a lot more time in Washington legislating in that year. That was the case with President Trump in 2017. And while it's not always what we might like personally, I think it's what we're elected to do, and that means we've got to spend a few more days up in Washington than we might like. At least we're accomplishing the agenda that President Trump and we all ran on last year. But I think next year, as is typical, again, in even-numbered years and election years, you get closer to election, a little bit more predictability in the Senate calendar, a little bit less time in session in Washington, some more time to be at home with their voters. Thanks for the question, Joe.
Chris, you want to take that one first?
Sure. I think that, it was actually 2 weeks ago, I think, that we actually had this conversation. So we've actually, when we had this conversation, we were in the middle of the drought. I've been feeding hay to my cattle almost 2 months, right? I mean, I got nothing left to feed them. So relief can't come quick enough. With this Congress about to be in a shutdown, or our government about to shut down, I don't know if they're going to be able to do anything. I hope they're able to do something. I just took a trip down to the southern part of the state, and there were parts that were greener, but there's a lot of brown. Particularly, all the way down to Little Rock, you're seeing a lot of brown.
Yeah.
And even North Louisiana, I was with some family, they were complaining about the drought. So I'm assuming it extends everywhere. So I don't know if that's something that our legislature can help with, but I certainly hope they can get it together and get our farmers some relief.
Well, one thing President Trump just stated a few days ago that he intends to take some of the tariff revenue and earmark it for farmers' relief, because part of the problem the farmers are experiencing is a direct result of the tariffs that he's placed, on China and various other countries. That now they're basically not buying our soybeans. I noticed, I believe it was Chile, just made a huge sale to the signed a huge contract to the Chinese on them. Jason?
Yeah, I think, like to Chris's point, is there going to be a quick fix? Possibly not. I know that Senator Cotton is aware of it, is concerned. I remember back when we were still in session, when Senator Cotton had made a trip here, we had a early morning talk with him around Little Rock, and we were talking about that because if you remember early on when we were still in session, we were in flooding stage. We were dealing with floods, and so our farmers weren't able to get crops out in time because what they're normally used to, that timeline was pushed to the right because of all the flooding. Fast forward, now all of a sudden the rain stopped. So, we were looking at those issues. I remember the questions coming up because Senator Blake Johnson brought it up when we were sitting around talking about, the farmers. And then more recently, just last week, actually, it was last week on Tuesday, Stuttgart, I think, is where the meeting was. I stayed in Little Rock instead of going to Stuttgart, but because we were talking prison, we were talking, I was talking to the folks there with some questions, and so I wasn't able to get over to Stuttgart. But Deanne Vaught had brought this up a couple weeks ago, and so we put a letter together that went to President Trump, stating the emergency that we were at and how our farmers here in Arkansas were in dire need of assistance, and that was received. We have received information back. That information was received. They understand the severity of this, and so we know that they're looking at it. We know that they see that Arkansas farmers right now are in a dire strait, and so I know Senator Cotton is doing his part and banging that drum, making sure that that we can get something headed that way if at all possible.
Well, and people want to complain about the tariffs and the result. Well, what we have to understand is our country didn't get in the shape it's in, in just a year or two. It's been getting progressively worse for decades, and it's going to take some pain to get it back on track. It's like having cancer. You got to cut it out, and then you got to go through the radiation, the chemo, and all the other stuff in order to get rid of that. Well, we're in a process of getting rid of that cancer here now, and it's going to be painful, and unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people that are hurt by it. But I have full faith that between Senator Cotton and Congressman Crawford and the rest of the Republican delegation and President Trump, that they're going to work out something, the best they can do to take care of it. Gary, we'll move on to number 3.
Next up, we'll go to Philip Mock from Salem. You're live to ask your question.
Hey, Senator Cotton. I had a question about health care. How are you going to help, how the Republicans going to help preserve health care for me and my wife who are in our mid-60s over the next couple of years, this year and the next years to come?
Thanks, Philip, for the question. Let me take a step back and say, I don't know how you and your wife get your health care, but I imagine we have people on the phone call who get health care through a variety of means. I'll just touch briefly on most of the most common ways that Arkansans are getting and paying for their health care. First, if you're in your mid or especially your later 60s, you're most likely on Medicare, or you're going to be on Medicare soon. Our legislation earlier this year doesn't touch Medicare in any way. On the contrary, it's going to strengthen healthcare across Arkansas, but especially in rural counties like yours. We dedicated $50 billion to improve rural healthcare. Half of that money will be distributed directly to the states. The other half will be distributed based on competitive grants. I'm very confident that the hospitals and clinics across our state, especially in your 5 counties, are going to be very competitive. Those, Senator Bozeman and I, along with Governor Sanders, will work to make sure that you're competitive. And that's important because, as many of you know, you may have Medicare, maybe you're on Medicaid as well. But if you don't have a doctor that takes those kinds of insurance, then you still can't get good health care. Second, on Medicaid, I know there's been a lot of misrepresentation in the media about what the Big Beautiful did. I want to clear up that if you're on Medicaid because of lower income levels, because you hit a rough patch in life, because you have certain disabilities or other eligibility criteria, you're not going to have any issue. Your Medicaid will be protected exactly as it is. What the Medicaid reforms and the Big Beautiful did was require, as I said earlier with the food stamps, people to take basic anti-fraud steps to verify their income level, to ensure that they don't have employer-provided health insurance, to make sure that they're an American citizen or a legal permanent resident who has a legal right to Medicaid as opposed to illegal aliens. And it asks people to, if they can, they're able-bodied and they don't have children, to work and really not even work a full-time job, to work less than a half-time job, or even go to school or do volunteer work. Our state, under Governor Sanders and our legislature, had already implemented some of these verification of eligibility requirements or work requirements. I don't expect we'll see much change at all. If you get private employer-provided insurance, again, our legislation doesn't change that at all. That's the insurance that you get through your employer. And that's a decision for you and your employer to make about how, what kind of plans they offer and what they're available to offer. Again, I worry that premiums may be going up because of inflation over the last 4 years, but we're doing everything we can to get inflation down and to get healthcare inflation in particular down. Finally, if you get your health insurance on the health insurance exchanges in our state, not through your employer, I suspect sometime in the next couple months, we will consider the expiring enhanced subsidy payments that the Democrats implemented in 21 and 22. What I don't think we'll do, at least what I don't hope we'll do, is simply extend those without examining the massive risk of fraud that they propose, because they have continual enrollment, because they don't have income eligibility requirement or verification requirements, because they allow insurers to move you around from plan to plan. So we want to make sure that people have quality, affordable health insurance, but we also want to make sure that we're not inviting fraudsters to take advantage of vulnerable Arkansans. So, like I said, I don't know how you get your health insurance in particular, but I suspect everyone on this phone call gets it in one of those ways. I just wanted to touch the waterfront on all four of them.
Jason, you want to take a run at that one?
Sure. I thought that was really great because Senator Cotton kind of hit all of the areas there, instead of just kind of focusing on one. He didn't know, the caller, what the exact situation was. So the things that I drew from that and what I love to see, he kind of hit the nail on the head. Legislation, we want to, kind of goes back to Reagan's old trust but verify. There are folks that need this, Medicaid, Medicare, they need that, that health care. But we need to make sure that the folks that are using it correctly, and they should be using it and not misusing it. Because every dollar that's misused is a dollar that we can't spend somewhere else where it should have been. So making sure that folks are on the right program, they're if there's a work program requirement for it, if there's something like that, part of the system, that's the way I think that it should be done, because that way we're making sure that every dollar counts and it's being used for what it needs to. When I look at folks out there that are constantly needing something. We know that there are folks that need it, but we just want to make sure that the right people have it in their hands and have access, because if they don't have access to it, then we've done them a disservice. So,
and make sure that the people that are here illegally are not sponging off for the rest of us.
That's right.
I mean, we all know how expensive healthcare is to begin with. When you have millions, literally millions of illegal aliens drawing on that, it's like, wow.
Our healthcare, when you look at those dollars and where they're going, there are some major, major flaws in the system. And I mean, there's some things that, we can legislate out. Some things could be, handled a little bit better too. If instead of, hey, my knee hurts, I'm going to go to the emergency room. If we kind of used the healthcare system the way it should be, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. If those emergency situations were dealt with in the emergency room and those areas that weren't really an emergency, if we could convince people to not use those, that would bring those costs down too. But is that going to be an overnight fix? It's not, Russ. That's something that, we've got to this point, just like to your point earlier, we got to this point in healthcare over years and years and years, and it's not something you're going to turn the ship around overnight.
No.
Chris? Well, I think it was a good answer. Particularly in this community, the Medicare and Medicaid discussion is very important. As someone who lost insurance when Obamacare came along, I would like to see Obamacare addressed. It alone has inflated the cost of insurance tenfold, 12-fold, maybe more since I started it. So he did mention bringing the subsidies back. That's really the only thing that makes Obamacare affordable is those subsidies. Without the subsidies, it is absolutely unaffordable for most Americans. So I'd like to see some more work in that regard. I am glad he did recognize the people like myself that have to get the insurance off the exchange. We are suffering out there. It is a terrible system, and we have no choice. We had better options prior to the Obamacare being put in place, and so I'd like to have some of those options back. So hopefully they can work on that in the future.
Yeah, I agree.
When you take away all the private options, and the only way you can get your insurance is through the government, it's like that. That just completely killed all the competition. Not exactly. That there was a whole lot of competition in the healthcare industry to begin with, but the government doesn't have too many people competing against it.
That's right. Like, to your point, we're in a retirement community. There's a lot of retirees that are on healthcare, and Russ and I were on the retiree program, so a little bit different. But I've got a young daughter, and son-in-law, and I mean, what they're having to pay for their healthcare is astronomical. And I mean, it is. Yeah. That system is terrible. It really is.
And if it's astronomical now, I don't know how they get it, but the subsidies, I don't know who can afford the non-subsidized price on the exchange.
Yep.
It would be a lot of money to pay for that. So with the subsidies, it's at least reasonable.
I think theirs is nearly $1,000 a month. It's like $800 or something. It's a house payment.
Yeah.
And I just can't even imagine it.
My daughter has an autistic 4-year-old, and she's paying over $1,000 a month
Hmm.
for insurance for her and her
Yeah.
son.
Yep.
So it's ridiculous.
So that needs to be addressed. Well, that won't be addressed anytime soon. Hopefully, President Trump, once he ends all the wars, maybe he can turn his attention to fixing our healthcare system.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're stuck with it because going back to a private health care system or public, like we had, all of the risk management tables and stuff, I'm sure they've all been destroyed, intentionally so, So, you would be starting from scratch. And I shudder to think the catastrophe that would be. Gary, want to hit us with number 4?
Next up, we will go to Kim Coker in Mountain Home. You're live to ask your question.
Yes, hello, Senator Cotton. My question is, at first here, excuse me, what can Congress do to crack down on crime?
Yeah, Ken, thanks for the question about crime. I think it's fair to say that, over my 10 years in the Congress, I've been the toughest Republican on crime and on law and order. In 2018, and one of the only times I've had to break with the president, I voted against the so-called First Step Act, which reduced sentences in the federal prison system and released lots of prisoners at the time. I didn't think that was smart then. I certainly don't think we should be pursuing that kind of policy now. Most Republicans have come around to that point of view. Democrats, though, still refuse. So I fully back what the president has done in Washington, D.C. in particular. Washington is not just the city for people who live there, not just for the people who work there. It's our city. It's a federal city. It belongs to all of us. And thousands of Arkansans come visit me when the Senate is in session, and they should feel safe, and their families should feel safe, and they shouldn't have to be worried about being mugged or assaulted or carjacked or even accosted by homeless and drug-addicted persons on the streets. The president has recently announced he's going to do something similar in Memphis with the support of the Tennessee governor. I'm frankly mystified why more mayors who have problems with crime wouldn't want the help of the federal government. Why would you not want the FBI and the DEA and Homeland Security, and if necessary, the National Guard, to come help clean up hardened criminals in your city? Because that's what they did in Washington, D.C. These are not low-level offenders. These are hardened criminals. So I think that's a model that could be used elsewhere. There are lots of things that the Congress could do, though, that would help the president, that would give him more authority than he currently has, that would also help our governors, mayors, and police departments. Comes in the forms of grants to police departments and sheriff's departments for more equipment or for hiring more officers. Our big, beautiful bill will contribute in part to hiring more law enforcement in this country. Stiffening penalties for lots of violent crimes. Most street crime, most murders, rapes, assaults, burglaries are going to be prosecuted by state law, but it helps to have a federal backstop. It helps for a local prosecutor in your county to be able to threaten a criminal with turning him over to the federal system for trial and imprisonment in the federal system, where they don't have parole, where you serve almost the full length of your sentence, to get them to plead out to the serious crimes they committed and not put such serious burdens on our state criminal justice system. And I have a whole host of laws that I would like to see packaged up as part of a larger crime bill on stiffening penalties for carjacking, for trafficking in fentanyl and other synthetic opioids, for rioting, for disrupting law and order, so on and so forth. One final initiative I would note, you may have seen this in the news a couple of weeks ago, we had the president's chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, in the state with Governor Sanders and Attorney General Griffin and I. We visited the Varner maximum security prison. We then had a press conference to talk about it. That's banning contraband cell phones inside of our prisons. Most people were never aware of this problem. I wasn't until I was in the Senate. But if prisoners can get cell phones, and they can get them very easily through a variety of means, they can use it not just to commit crimes and threaten people who are in those prisons, like the correctional officers, but even worse, law-abiding Arkansans who are outside those prisons. So I'm very pleased that after many years of working this issue in the Senate with Democrats obstructing our legislation, we have a FCC chairman and a president now who are going to move forward and allow our prisons, like Varner, or even your county jails for that matter, to block cell phone signals to prevent prisoners, once they've been arrested and put behind bars, from continuing their criminal ways. So, Ken, probably not every single thing that we could do, but just off the top of my mind, that's what I think those are some steps we can take to crack down on crime, to protect law-abiding Arkansans, and to build on the great success the president has seen so far in Washington, D.C.
Chris?
Okay, so that's a very complex question, and people ask, senators and representatives these kind of questions that are very difficult to answer because it's a very, very complex situation. What we've seen in this country lately is you have liberal judges, liberal district attorneys letting somebody go that should remain in prison. I don't know how much of a federal issue that is. I don't know how much they can solve that. You've got the case of Irina Zarutska, murdered on a train in North Carolina. The assailant was mentally ill and had been in and out of prison 14 times. That's the ultimate problem that has to be solved. Mm-hmm. I do regret that Irina's death got lost or overshadowed by Charlie Kirk's assassination, because the two incidents taken together show a deep problem in this country. And it's going to take both local, state, and federal cooperation to fix it. Mm-hmm. So he can only do what he can do, but I don't know how you stop a judge or a series of judges from permitting a serial criminal to continue to commit crimes. So I would like to hear more about what what could be done at the federal level, to prevent that. Because I'm not sure that's entirely up to the feds, depending on what court someone is arraigned in.
Well, I think if you go and look at our lawmakers, maybe they need to stiffen or implement some kind of penalties for the prosecutors and the judges to hold them accountable if some of them, that they have repeatedly released on their own recognizance, or made, had them, I signed this promissory note that I will be here next Tuesday or whatever. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do between now and next Tuesday, but I'll be here next Tuesday, to show up at court. Hold them accountable for the actions that they have allowed to happen by releasing them. Mm-hmm. Jason?
Great point. And I mean, Chris, you hit the nail on the head, I believe, because you've got, we've got a massive problem. And this is just like our other questions. We're dealing with something that has gotten so bad over time that put us to where we are right now. And I think about this quite a bit, because there is things we can do at a state level. There's things we can do at a federal level as well. And I think it's going to take everything. For me, how I look at this is, some of the stuff that we can put into place right now, we're not going to see immediate results. In my opinion, what we need to do is a couple things, couple fold. If we have stiffer penalties, we are able to keep people in jail longer. And then, in my opinion, make jail a little bit unhealthier, not necessarily unhealthy, but make it to where it's not just a friendly place to hang out, watch TV.
Over there, like Alligator Alcatraz?
Something like that. To me, it's kind of like, let's make it more punitive in nature. If we made it to where it kind of stunk a little bit to be there, well, then you're not going to actually desire to be there. Where are you going to actually see the results from that is going to be the kids. It's going to have to trickle way down to the kids, to where the kids at a younger age don't want to go to jail. So number one, if we make it a little bit harsher, so while you're there, and when I say harsher, I'm not talking about beatings or locking people in the dark. And that's where this fine line. It's like, okay, what can you legally do? What do we consider inhumane? What kind of laws and stuff are going to inhibit us from doing things like that? But in my opinion, we need to get creative and make it stiffer punishment while you're in. While they're in, it's not just a place to lay on your neck. It's not a place to just, to hang out. It's a place to work. To me, find creatively ways to actually do some work. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's stamping out license plates or whatever, breaking rocks, but doing something for the community. And I understand that gets into, okay, who's going to watch them? There's get creative. That's what I'm saying is like we can get creative and find ways to where we solve the problem of making it a little bit more punitive in nature, which maybe will draw it down to where we have less people going into jail. Again, we're not going to see the results for years and years and years to come. And this is not a popular, like what I said, it's not popular with a lot of people because they're like, well, we've got to treat people humanely. We're talking about criminals. We're talking about people who broke the law. They don't have to be treated humanely all the time. I'm not saying to be inhumane, and I'm saying you do have to love people, but you can still make it a way that you're actually punishing, punitive in nature. So
my grandfather lived his entire life without having air conditioning. Do they need air conditioning?
Right. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. And there's creative ways. Again, I'm not saying to be inhumane, but there's a fine line of if we're just going to put people up, and we're just, hey, it's just a little bit less of a glamorous than a 2-star hotel that they're in,
Well, these people that kill people, the guy that killed
Ariana Nazarenko, yeah.
He didn't humanely kill her.
Exactly.
The guy that shot Charlie Kirk didn't humanely kill him. Okay.
That's right.
I'm about fed up with treating these animals humanely. It's time to put them out in the old, as the old saying goes, turn big rocks into little rocks, and once you've got that done, turn the little rocks into littler rocks or whatever it takes, but keep them busy and work them. Make it punishment, because right now prison for a lot of these people is not punishment.
Exactly. And I think we talk about this on another discussion. There are, and I'm not saying there's not programs that are able to rehabilitate folks. We do talk about that later. I know Senator Cotton addresses that. There's some great programs, and that can get us, when we talk about that, that is a great way that we can invest into them. Again, are you going to see it overnight results? We have to build these results. It didn't take us overnight to get to where we're at. It's going to take a little while to get back to where we need to be.
That's true. And at least what we've seen now over the last couple of weeks is President Trump has taken it and said, okay, you don't want to clean up your cities from the crime. We'll clean them up for you, with the National Guard, the FBI, whoever it takes, and he's moving them on in. So,
and that's great, because if you think about those people that are living in those communities, it's a disservice to them. Any of those homeowners, business owners, you're not providing a safe place for them to live, raise a family, work, run a business. And that's just not fair.
In Washington, D.C. alone, they took over 1,500 career criminals off the streets. 1,500.
Yeah.
I go back to Mayor Giuliani when he took over as mayor in New York with the broken window policy. They started watching who was breaking the windows. And when they arrested the guy that was breaking the window. Come to find out, the same guy that was breaking the windows was the one jumping the turnstiles at the subway, who was the one that was breaking into other people's homes and stuff. So once they started capturing the little criminals, all of a sudden they found out, well, the other crimes are going down too, because it was the same people committing all of them.
Yep.
So, good on them. Gary, you want to go with number 5?
Next up, we'll go to Stephen Krebs. You are live to ask your question.
Hello, Senator Cotton. I appreciate your service to this country. My question specifically was, what did you think about the various houses that were interrogating Kash Patel, the FBI director, and all the derogatory statements that were made during this week?
Stephen, I'll confess that in all the work I was doing on my committees in the Senate, I didn't get to see much of Kash's testimony before the Senate, and I don't think any before the House. I saw a couple highlights. I will say I've gotten to know Kash very well over the years. When he was an aide in the Congress, and I was a senator when he worked in the White House in the first term, and especially since he's become the FBI director. The FBI is responsible for a lot of sensitive intelligence programs, and I'm the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, so we have frequent conversations about our work and call and text regularly. I told him Tuesday morning before he went for the Senate Judiciary Committee that I've been on that committee. The Democrats on there are kind of excitable and over the top, and I found the best The best response is to be kind of measured and sober, the adult in the room, speaking authoritatively about stuff in his competence. He texted me back, said, "That's absolutely what I'm going to do, sir." And then about 3 hours later, he said, "I did my best, but I couldn't help myself with Adam Schiff and Cory Booker." from the highlights I saw, I understand why Cash couldn't hold on from the two of them. They got what they deserved. I'll just say I thought Cash in general, though, has been doing an outstanding job for the president. Again, I can't get into every detail of what I've seen him do and not do because a lot of it's classified. But he's doing exactly what the president hired him to do and what you and I and every Arkansan should expect an FBI director to do. He is following the law and following the facts to wherever they lead. And sometimes that may yield a result that pleases us. Sometimes it may yield a result that displeases us. I've made referrals for investigations to Cash in the past, asked the FBI to look into something. He's called me within a few weeks, said, "We looked into this. I think your concerns are valid that you sent to us. Unfortunately, my agents and the prosecutors just don't think that we have enough evidence to prove this case out in court." And I told them, it's like, "Cash, that's all I expect you to do. I don't expect you to pursue cases that you can't prove in court." And what we might assert in a court of public opinion, if you will, is different than what the FBI and the Department of Justice can prove in a court of law. So I think Cash Patel and Pam Bondi as well as the Attorney General have been doing an outstanding job. And one of the things they're wanting to do is actually wade in controversy, whereas past directors or past attorney generals have not. And you may see more of that controversy. Like I said, with the president's crackdown on Antifa and other left-wing groups that may be funding or radicalizing our fellow Americans, that's going to generate a lot of heat. But fortunately, I think Cash and Pam are willing to bear that heat and do the right thing, stuff that is oftentimes overdue. But I can tell you that especially as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee who works with Cash on a pretty regular basis, I think he's doing a very good job doing just what the president expected and wanted him to do.
Jason?
There was I'm with Senator Cotton on that. I didn't watch all of it. There was some of the clips I've seen. He has definitely held his own, and I mean there was a lot to unpack there as well. Senator Cotton covered quite the gamut. So a couple of things that I loved, especially here recently. One that top of mind was one of the last that he spoke on, were President Trump, naming Antifa as a terrorist organization is good on, and that's exactly what needs to be done. When we've got an organization having their face covered, helmets, in battle gear, they're going up against our police, our law-abiding citizens, and they're actually causing riots. They are a terrorist organization.
And it's worldwide.
Oh, it's nuts.
It started in East Germany.
Yeah.
Just after the war, World War II. And they've had problems with them. The French have had all kinds of problems. The UK, it's worldwide.
Yeah. So for the president to go after them, I think that's great, and that's what we need to do. That gets us closer to a lawful society again, to where we need to be. I thought that was great. And you look here locally. Luckily, at this point, we have not had any kind of craziness like that. But one of the things that I always, keep in mind is that we're only a few crazies away. If we get the wrong kind of people show up and try to get their, voice be heard over this kind of stuff, that's what we have to be mindful of, is that, we don't have it right now. Nobody's dropping off a pallet of bricks in our downtown, or nobody's, causing, havoc to our businesses and stuff. Right now, they're not. But we need to be strong, and we need to be making sure that we are, standing tough and talking to folks, making sure we're getting the word out there so that we don't end up like one of those crazy cities like that.
Well, Antifa has bragged that they have people in all 50 states.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I remember it wasn't that long ago that there was a thing going on down in Boone County, right on the square, and there were people bussed in for that. Mm-hmm. There were people bussed in. That's pretty darn close to our community when they're going to, stand around there. Yeah. I think another thing that we need as a society, as a community, we need to be mindful of what's going on around us. We have businesses around here. There's a business, and staying I really, Senator Cotton mentioned that he had talked to Kash Patel about certain, things, and he had to get an opinion from him on it. Didn't exactly, wasn't an action because, of course, Patel said, "Hey, I can't do anything with that right now. Right now, I can't." We've got those kind of things right here. I've actually talked with Mayor Adams before. I've talked with our chief about a business that I'm concerned about right here in Mountain Home. Bothers me. It bothers me when it popped up. It's still here right now. They're following the law supposedly, but to me, we need to be watching for that kind of stuff because we don't need anything to come in and ruin what we've got.
That's right. Chris?
So, I don't really know why they have these hearings at all, other than to allow liberals to get up and spout out lies and misrepresentations, and as a bully pulpit to spread whatever lies and misinformation they want. So I really enjoyed watching Kash give it right back to him.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the people that are being interrogated, and that's what it is interrogation. They're a little timid, they're a little cowed. It's a big deal. You're sitting there being judged by these aggressive liberal senators. And I love the way Kash just gave it right back. It was a laugh out loud sort of moments where Kash is doing that. So I hope more of when these hearings happen, I hope more of Trump's cabinet or directors. I really hope they stand up for themselves and just push back and because what Kash has on his side is the truth.
That's exactly right.
And the lies of these liberals just really they wither and they have no shame. You watch the expression of Cory Booker while Kash Patel is just beating him up. And you can tell nothing's getting through.
Yeah.
There's no shame. There's no sense of, oh my, perhaps I said something. No, it's just, they're out there with their agenda. And so on the one hand, I do love the way that Kash exposed it.
Yeah.
Right. It was all about their aggrandizement and nothing else.
Mm-hmm. The best line of all was Adam Schiff. You're a political buffoon. Gary, let's go to number 6.
Next up, we'll do my best on the last name here. Manford Schlenkrich from Norfolk. You are live.
Yeah, Senator Cotton, thank you for your service. Got a question for you. Why do we allow the Chinese to own property, especially during near military institutions in this country? Can we remove them from owning property, and how can we prevent them from getting property because they're all over the country?
Manfred, that is music to my ears. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I've got a book out, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, that touches in part on this very question. The simplest way I put this is none of us can go to China and buy property. This communist nation doesn't even let its own citizens buy property. And we certainly couldn't buy property next to their military bases or major power generation stations or dams or other critical infrastructure. Why would we allow them to do it here in the United States? Our state, fortunately, has already taken this step. Governor Sanders and the legislature have prohibited Chinese nationals from purchasing land next to any critical infrastructure or sensitive site. I've got proposals to do the same thing on a national level. A little bit harder to get that through the Congress, but we're still working on it. We're also working with the administration to try to take executive action using their existing authority under something called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which reviews not just, say, big Chinese purchases of major businesses or in sensitive industries, but should be able to view purchases of land and not just, say, farmland in Arkansas or land next to a military base, but any real estate that is frequently used as a way to launder money out of China. High-rise condo buildings in Miami Beach or office space in New York City. I will say, Manfred, one challenge the authorities have, because it's such a massive scale of problem, is just identifying the Chinese ownership behind what is oftentimes an LLC, a partnership, or trust, or other shell corporation. So one thing I encourage you all to do, and encourage your friends across the state and across the country to do, if you think Chinese nationals are buying property, and especially if you think they're buying property next to sensitive infrastructure for our country, please let someone know. Let your local police department know, let your state representative know, so they can raise that to the authorities, whether it's the U.S. Attorney and the FBI in Arkansas, whether it's John Bozeman or me or Rick Crawford or your other congressmen around the state, please let us know, because one of the biggest challenges we have is the shell game that Chinese nationals, usually associated with the Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army, play to conceal the fact that it is Chinese money and Chinese nationals that is buying this land.
Okay.
Well, I don't know who's supposed to go. I'll just go ahead and go. I think it's a great idea. We got to realize that farmland is a strategic resource. It's no different than aluminum, steel, titanium, or the ability to make chips. So I think that we have a law here,
we do.
Which
we
is
do.
fantastic.
From this 95th General Assembly.
Exactly. So I think that's fantastic, and we need to keep that up. I think we also need to look out for any other major corporation or other entities beyond China that's buying up our farmland. But that's another issue, perhaps. So, yeah, I think it'd be great if you could roll it out across the whole country.
Yeah. And I don't think, he was talking about CFIUS there, Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. If you recall, CFIUS is the very multi-agency task group up there in D.C. that allowed Hillary Clinton to sell 20% of our uranium to Rosatom, a Russian nuclear company. So we can't always rely on the people back in D.C. to uncover everything. So it is incumbent upon us to keep our eye out and say, this doesn't smell right. It doesn't look right. Some of the people that are coming and going over here on this, need to be turned in. So.
Definitely.
Jason?
Definitely. And, to Chris's point, we do have that law, like we said, and, proud to sign on to that. Governor Sanders had a great initiative this year in the General Assembly for those bills. We kind of lumped them all together and called them like the China bills. And, there was quite a few of them. That was one of them specifically, no farmland being sold to Chinese, folks with from Chinese backgrounds, and I forget everything they covered. And it is a resource. If we lose that, it's not that farmland has to be next to anything special or anything, military or anything, but that resource is our resource. And if we allow an enemy, to take hold of that resource, we're just giving up something that we should be holding tight.
With enough land, all they have to do is let it lay fallow for a year or two.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we have a serious problem in this country.
Yep.
Well, and you go back just a few years, the Chinese bought Smithfield Food, the largest pork producer in the United States. Yep. They bought several other of the, major food companies. Well, guess what? Number one, they can't feed themselves. They have to import a huge percentage of their food. Okay. So all of a sudden, if they just shut off the spigot and say all the pork that we're growing in the United States is going to be shipped to China, what can we do about it?
Right.
Technically nothing, under the current laws and stuff. So it's not just the land, it's the food and taking over the other large companies, especially food. Let's face it, we don't fight very well when we're hungry.
Yeah.
And when you're starving, you'll pretty much give up and say, yeah, okay, just give me something to eat and I'll do whatever you ask.
That's right.
So, okay, number 7.
All right, thank you, Senator Cotton. Next up, we will go to Cassie Wilson from Cave City. You're live.
Okay, what is your response to the argument that rehabilitation programs are a cost-effective way to reduce prison populations and save taxpayer money compared to prolonged incarceration? And do you believe that focusing on rehabilitation programs for incarcerated individuals could reduce the recidivism rate?
Yeah, Cassie, thanks for the question. I think there's no question we need good, reliable, evidence-based rehabilitation programs for criminals. And I think that we need to target them in the way that makes the most sense. Look, if you're not on death row or in for life without parole, you're going to be released one day. It is in your interest, and it's in the broader society's interest that we do everything we can to try to turn you away from a criminal lifestyle and becoming a law-abiding and productive citizen. Where is the targeting that? I've looked at this question a lot. I've talked a lot with law enforcement. Obviously, people who are a little bit younger, who still have a lot of runway in life ahead of them, people who are in for crimes who aren't violent crimes necessarily, people who committed crimes of passion who aren't necessarily engaged in crime as a way of life. I've also, again, looked at the evidence on this. I tend to think that the best programs that I've seen, not just in Arkansas, but around the country, are faith-based programs. If you can get someone to find or return to their faith, they're most likely to turn away from a life of crime and become productive, constructive citizens. So I think it's important that we invest in such programs and that we allow our prisons and especially our jails to be open to anyone that wants to come in and try to help rehabilitate prisoners, whether it's introducing them to the gospel of Christ or teaching them a craft or a trade, getting them their GED, giving them the kind of counseling they need to control some of the impulses that may have gotten them behind bars in the first place. I think that is all very important. I do think we need to be clear-eyed that we do have high recidivism rates, and in many cases, rehabilitation doesn't work. And for the hardened criminals, what we need is long jail sentences. But for especially first-time offenders who are not repeat offenders, who are not violent, who are young and have a chance to turn their life around, I think it's in everyone's interests, most notably the offenders and their future potential victims, that we try to get them back on their feet once they get out from behind bars and become productive, constructive citizens.
Jason?
So like we said earlier, and I really thought Senator Cotton's answer was great, because there are some great programs. There really are. And, as I said earlier, you can tell I'm a tough on crime type person as well, but I do see great value in these. I think that we need to be very judicious while looking at them and make sure that we're spending the money in the right place. But there's some great data out there for folks that really are not career criminals and are able to turn their lives around and become very productive. In fact, have gone on to help other people. So how can we do it? I think this is all part of what we talked about earlier, where if we get into, the justice system and we're actually attacking it head on, we kind of get creative on what we're going to do when they're in jail. We try to get them to where they're not wanting to go to jail. And then the ones that actually do end up getting in their jail, we can try to work on how can we get them into a program that's the ones that it makes sense to get them in the program, how can we get those folks into a program that's going to produce those results that we're seeing and that we're looking for. I think it's a good thing. I think some programs are really good. We've got some right here locally that have got some great results. And I've met some people that have come out of those programs and they're doing great. So I think, again, being creative, being judicious, making sure that we're doing the right thing.
This is not an issue that I've looked into very much, but I did, as he was talking, I was wondering, and maybe you can answer this question, how big are the federal programs for these as opposed to state? I mean, how much money comes from the feds? Is this something that, instead of sending billions of dollars overseas, can we divert some of that money to helping, here?
It's a good question. I don't know the federal, I think that the local ones, when we look at the local ones, they rely heavily on local donations. Local, like the one that I know of, Care Center, it's changed name to Kingdom. I don't remember the name of it, but it's Kingdom something.
Yeah, I heard it.
But it's actually got great results. But I think they rely heavily on local donations. Right.
Okay. So that would be an interesting question if we ever have a follow-up town hall is, could we get more federal funds devoted? That would seem, if this process works, and it sounds like you believe it does, then it seems like throwing more money at that in the appropriate way would be a good thing to help break this cycle.
You're going to spend the money somewhere. You're either going to spend money building bigger jails, housing, clothing, feeding, criminals to sit around and lay on their neck, or you're going to spend some money on hopefully getting them to where they never actually get into jail before that. If we could get it before they ever end up in jail, to me, that's a success. Is it going to happen overnight? It's not. But boy, I think that's what we need to try to work towards.
Well, I'll go back to one of our previous guests. We were talking about the crime locally. And he said virtually all the crime locally can be traced back to the drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the recidivism rate is probably directly proportional to the drug problem. I have a brother-in-law that has had problems with addiction for years. And, it's like just when you think he's kicked it, all of a sudden, here it comes again. Okay. Yeah. So, or I should say nephew. But the thing about it is the drugs, once they get a hold of you, they're not going to let go. And when that addiction gets so bad, you're going to do what you have to do in your own mind to fix that, get that fix, for that addiction. And you've got to address the root cause in order to have success in any kind of rehabilitation process. Yeah. So until we can find some way, number one, getting the drugs off the street is a good first step, but it's, you got to quit hitting just the little guy on the street corner here pushing the drugs. You got to go for the big guys. Yep. Now, I understand that President Trump is even, that they're even talking about going down and starting to hit the processing facilities and everything in Venezuela. But, as far as I'm concerned, go for it. Anywhere, not just Venezuela. Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, you name it. If they're cooking it and growing it and everything, just like the poppy fields over in Afghanistan, spray them with Agent Orange if you have to. I don't care, but but we've got to address the drug problem in this country in order to be able to make progress on this recidivism rate.
We started off by talking about Charlie Kirk, and one of the things Charlie Kirk, he talked about this a lot. And when because you kind of, to your point, if we get back to like the root cause, we look at root cause analysis. That's the only way we're going to ever fix it. One thing that Charlie Kirk, time and time again, you would hear him talk about root cause on folks in jail, drugs, things like that. And when we trace that root cause back, it goes back to the family. Yep. It goes back to the family, and it goes back to when they tear down the family. That's what causes a lot of these problems. We tear down the family. We pull the father out of the family. Now we've got a family with no father. Kids run amok. They run into problem, end up in drugs, end up in jail, and then recidivism right back on the streets doing it again. Yep. To Senator Cotton, back to his point, the faith-based programs, Care Center, or the new name that it is, John 3:16, those have great results. Is everyone come out perfect? Not everyone's perfect. You're not going to get 100% perfection. But there is a lot of good folks that come out of those programs. And to me, that's where we should spend some time, spend some effort. And, to Chris's point, what can we do federally? Because we can only do so much at the state level. So great question there, Chris. And that's something that should be looked into.
Great. Number 8.
Next up, we'll go to James Winston.
Yes, Senator Cotton. This is James Winston from Dolph, Arkansas. I brought a story to your attention dealing with the Veterans Administration in Arkansas itself. I was the first person in history through the prosthetics department to make them give me a hearing in person ever. And I'm wondering, what kind of action have you taken or will you take trying to investigate and trying to help the veterans of this great country? Like I said, this was a major issue and it was swept under the rug. And I'm just like to know what kind of action are you plan on doing to try to help veterans who made this country what it is. Thank you.
Well, thanks, James, for the question. Obviously, thanks for your service as well. I will say, in the general run of things, what I've heard from veterans across the state of Arkansas is that they largely get good care and quality service from the VA hospitals that we have and some of the outreach programs we have in our state. We have not had the worst of the scandals that you've seen in some other states. I think that's in part a testament to the people who work in our VA, many of whom tend to be veterans themselves. That said, I think we've all had a lot of experience, especially if you're a veteran, with the government bureaucracy, and you know that it can make mistakes, and it's only as good as the processes and the people it has in place. And sometimes in an organization as large as the VA, just like as large as our military, you're going to have a few bad apples. And we're committed to making sure that our veterans get top quality care and top quality service from our VA. And we welcome input when you're praising the VA and expressing your appreciation for what they've done. But we also welcome inputs when that's not the case. And we want to hear that. We want you to bring it to our attention. And I know that John Bozeman and our congressman feel the same, so we can address that with the local VA leaders and the leaders in Washington. And there's a good chance if it happened to you, it's not happening only to you. I can give you my commitment, James, that if you or any other veterans we have on the call have any negative experiences and you want to bring something to our attention that is maybe just a mistake, maybe an inconvenience, but especially if you think it's abuse or crime, please get in touch promptly with our office. In this setting, probably the simplest thing for me to do is just say, go to my website, cotton.senate.gov. I'm sure John Bozeman would welcome you to do the same on his, bozeman.senate.gov. You can get our phone numbers and where to contact us and provide us the information that you want us to have, and then we can open an active case and run things to ground. And sometimes we can get a very quick and very satisfactory answer, but sometimes it may turn into something more prolonged that we need to get to the bottom of. But we're committed to making sure that every veteran gets the care and the quality customer service that they deserve. James, thanks again for the question, for your service.
Chris, you got anything to say? I know you don't use VA.
I do not use VA. I would just say the following. My whole life, I've heard veterans talk about the VA and use VA like you might a four-letter word. And in matter of fact, when Obamacare was being talked about, the argument was, well, take a look at the VA if that's what government health care looks like, and do you want that? And you're absolutely right. I'm not a veteran. I never used the VA, and I think it's gotten better in the last few years. Just I do have friends my age who do use it. They don't complain about it the way the old timers did. But a country as bountiful as this one should never have this kind of problem. The VA should offer the best possible health care to our veterans, the best possible service, to commiserate with the service that our men and women have given this country, and they should receive the best. And it's a shame that they don't. So I'm glad that Senator Cotton addressed that. I think it needs to go. That more needs to be done to make it the best health care that we can possibly provide.
Jason,
great answers there, Chris. And I have personally not used the VA. I think I'm still healthy enough where I haven't been up there that much. Being a retiree, I know it's inevitable. We're getting there. But in our community, I get a lot of calls. And I get a lot that are from, I talk a lot of folks that have positive experiences. And so generally speaking, people are only going to call you if there's been an issue. And so when we do get calls, so far, the calls that I've gotten, Senator Cotton and I, sometimes we kind of overlap. So when they call me, it might be something that really is not going to be in our realm. But what we do is I'll connect them to the VA here locally. Our representatives will connect them there. And then what they'll do is if it's not going to be at the state level, which a lot of times it's not, that's going to be handled at the federal level, the national level, like more in his ballpark. And so then they'll kind of cross over there. But I will say for the most part, I'm hearing great things around here, which really makes me happy. Because like to your point, I had always heard of what a horrendous thing it was. And I mean, I've seen, pictures of OVA hospitals and stuff. And so luckily we have kind of come a long way and we're not there anymore. Is it perfect? Nothing's perfect. And what we need to do is make it better. And what I liked Senator Cotton, where he said, hey, let us know when there's something that needs to be fixed. We like to hear about the good, but when we hear about the bad, that's the only way we're going to be able to fix it. So,
well, the thing about it is under the Obama administration, the VA was a direct reflection of the disrespect that administration had for the service members. President Trump came in, fired a bunch of people that, quite frankly, should have never been close to a VA hospital or any other hospital as far as that's concerned. It got better. When Joe Biden took office, he brought back those very same people that had been fired previously and gave them back pay, and in many cases promoted them. So the VA took another turn for the worse. What we need to do is address something somehow to make it, insulate it, from that type of cycle where, you have an administration that disrespects the military, does not care for the veterans, that they can only have so much impact on the day-to-day operation of the VA. Because, I've been very fortunate. At 75 years old, I still, knock on wood, I've never had to spend a night in the hospital. And, even though I'm a retiree, I have TRICARE for life, so I don't use the VA. But, the thing about it is there's a lot of people that the VA has been a lifeline for them, for amputees and the people that are suffering from tremendous PTSD and many other, we've seen the Wounded Warrior commercials on TV, some of the most debilitating injuries, known to mankind. And it can only be treated, with people that have a genuine care for other people. So, from my standpoint, we need to do something to protect the VA so that an administration that comes in and just does not care to deal with them can only have minimal impact. Okay, moving on to number 9. He addresses the NGOs, and Lord help, what we've got here going in this country now with the NGOs.
Next up, we will go to Marcus Poole. You are live to ask your question.
Hello, Senator. Yeah, I've got a question about the NGOs. I've got a real problem with the NGOs. Looks like we've got all over this country that so many of them, I think, are fraudulent. What are you or Congress looking at to put some kind of stop on what's going on, and especially these organizations receiving government money, which they shouldn't, is my opinion.
Yeah. Well, Marcus, thanks for the question. You raise a very important point. For those who don't know, NGOs is a non-government organization. It's a pretty broad, far-reaching term for something that is not the government and is not a for-profit business, either a giant corporation or small business in your hometown. And a lot of that is great work. We're just talking to James about the VA, the VFW, and the American Legion, and all the other veteran service organizations would be considered NGOs. A lot of faith-based groups, probably in your local church, might be considered the same. So we want to be mindful that we don't paint with too broad a brush. But a lot of the NGOs, as Mark says, are getting taxpayer money, and they're wasting it. They're wasting it on overhead and salaries, or even worse, on radical left-wing indoctrination, polarization, advocacy programs. If they want to do that kind of work, I'm not sure why they would, but if they want to, they should do it on their own donors' dime. They should not be doing it on your taxpayer dollars. And that's one of the very first things that President Trump and his administration started cracking down on. I encourage them to do so. I applaud them for doing so. A lot of that was going through USAID, the Agency for International Development. Shocking numbers being revealed that, groups that were getting money to, say, prevent malaria in Africa were spending over 90% of that money on, their domestic employees here in the United States, almost nothing on poor kids in Africa. And you see that repeated over and over and over again. So the Trump administration, and that one very prominent example, is replaying it over and over again throughout the administration. It's reviewing carefully all of its grants programs to making sure that grants are going to worthy and meritorious NGOs that are, say, trying to reduce drug use among kids in our communities, or trying to provide Meals on Wheels for our senior citizens across the state, not misusing your tax dollars for left-wing advocacy or indoctrination purposes. I've got some legislation, Marcus, that would touch on this as well. For instance, that would take away 501c3 tax status from these groups. They don't have to pay taxes on their contributions. If you're left-wing political, or I should take a step back, if you're any political advocacy organization, you shouldn't be benefiting from the same tax provisions that, say, your local church does, or that the United Way does. It just happens to be concentrated again on the political left in this country because we've let them for way too long waste your tax dollars in ways that you don't approve of, and frankly, most Americans, not just most Arkansans, probably don't approve of. So, Marcus, thanks for highlighting a very important issue.
Jason?
You know that, like Senator Cotton said, there's some great NGOs out there. As we know, I'm a member of VFW, DAV, and American Legion. They do great things within our community and out there. And I agree. You know, if there's NGOs out there that are getting federal funding and they're doing the wrong thing, they're filling folks with the wrong indoctrination and things like that. We should really be looking at that. Because it gets back to what is our money, every single dollar. If we're not watching every single dollar and it's getting misused, it's not being, available for something that's going to make a positive impact. So I'm in complete agreement with Senator Cotton, and love that he's got some plans out there for other legislation and things. So love to see it.
Follow the money.
That's right. Always.
Follow the money. We're $37 trillion plus in debt. Follow the money, and see what goes to George Soros's Open Society Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Tides Foundation, and all these other foundations.
That's right.
Now that they're really taking a good hard look at Antifa, it's going to be very interesting to find out how much of their money came from some of these others that I just named, possibly.
And when you follow that money, look to see where it's going, because I just came back from a trip with other legislators from other states as well. And there was legislators there from other states like Nebraska who said there are folks that are in left seats there that are 100% funded by those organizations you just mentioned, because their annual salary for being a legislator in those places is like $800. And so you can't live off of that. And so what they're going to end up doing is they've got a 125 or 150,000 that's going to that person, that young left-seated legislator, and that's where that money's coming from, is from those piles. So if you wonder what's happening with this garbage money, that's what's happening. It's funded more garbage.
So I love the fact that this question was even asked, because a year ago, no one knew. And it's only because of President Trump and particularly Doge. Those first couple of weeks after the inauguration of President Trump, when Doge was coming out, can you believe this?
Yeah.
And can you believe that? And what I really took away is that what you just said. I don't know how big the Democratic Party really is. Like, they keep telling us they're 50% of the population. I don't believe it. I actually believe that these NGOs are the Democrat Party. And if we can get rid of those, we'll actually have real elections again. We'll actually begin seeing the country its legislatures, the state legislatures, its Congress begin to reflect the actual will of the people. I think when you take away all this money, the Democratic Party is going to wither. It may not die. They still got some dyed in the wool crazy, but without all the money, how are they going to win these elections? So I really think that this, I haven't heard much out of Doge lately. And I don't know really how interested Congress is in solving this problem. It really has got to come, I think, from the top.
Well, and before the town hall, when we were over in Hardy, and I interviewed Senator Cotton over there, I asked him if they were going to be able to codify some of these rescission packages and stuff, and some of these new cuts into permanency via legislation. He said, we hope so. They're certainly going to try. Because, if we don't codify these cuts, then, next year it's going to be right back in. I had a lady I was speaking with this weekend, and, she was complaining about the big, beautiful bill, had all this money in it. Yeah. Unfortunately, we've underfunded the military, Homeland Security, the Border Patrol, ICE, and several of these healthcare, and a lot of these things, to the point that people didn't realize how crooked the budgeting was under the Biden administration. that they were kicking some of these cost increases into 2026, which would be, okay, well, yeah, just about the time President Trump's really getting on his feet, here's somebody, there's these funding cuts, just pull the rug out from under him. So, they're certainly going to work on it, according to Senator Cotton.
Yeah.
Gary, number 10.
Thank you, Senator. Next up in line, we'll go to Angel Bodecker.
First and foremost, Senator, I want to thank you for representing us. My question is, well, my entire career, I am retired now, was in mental health. Most of the youth that are voting now are being persuaded by social media, i.e. TikTok, Facebook, I call it false book. What can we do to shut social media down?
Angela, I think I lost the last part of your question there. I do agree that there are a lot of vices on social media. It promotes a lot of social pathologies. I don't agree that we could shut it down. It's just, as the name says, it's the medium for communication, and many people use it for completely harmless and even uplifting ideas. They have prayer groups on it. They swap recipes. They reconnect with high school classmates, and so on and so forth. So I don't think social media is itself the problem. I think what we've learned over 30 years of the internet is all of the vices and sins and problems that we see in the real world, they can simply be recreated in the digital world. Now, they can be worse, obviously, but human nature is no different online than it is offline. One thing, though, I'm very committed to that you mentioned, Angel, is social media's effect on our youth. And you see a very clear increase in mental illness and antisocial behaviors about, say, now 15 years ago, when you had two things conjoined. One is the widespread adoption of smartphones, which put powerful computers in our pockets for the first time in human history, and two, the widespread adoption of social media. And it can be very harmful for young people to have that kind of constant, immediate access to an entire world. That's why I propose legislation that would simply say what we do in the real world to protect kids, we should do in the digital world as well. And we're all familiar with those steps in the real world. We don't let kids buy liquor until they're 21, buy cigarettes. We don't let them go to strip clubs. They don't get to go into tattoo parlors. We should apply those same standards to the digital world, and we should give parents a real say. Now, I know most of these companies say, like, oh, we have a policy, no one can use it under 13. If you have kids, or you've gone through the process of signing up for one of these accounts yourself, you know that that's silly. All you have to do is click a single box that says, yeah, I'm over 13 or I'm over 18. We need to take serious steps to actually implement verifiable age requirements before kids can get on social media. Nothing at all before age 13, only with the parent signing them up before age 18. This is not a hard problem technically. We have states as politically diverse as Arkansas and Wyoming on the one hand, and California and Illinois on the other hand, that use this for things like health insurance, paying taxes online, so on and so forth. It is not hard to have actual and legitimate age verification. The second thing, Angel, to your point is I introduced legislation years ago to study the problem of cell phones in schools. I'm glad now that more and more states are recognizing the serious drawbacks of allowing cell phones in schools. And our state, thankfully, with Governor Sanders and our legislature, has adopted the Bell-to-Bell No Cell Act, that students are not accessing their cell phone. Just take the problem of bullying. It's one thing to go to your school where you have several dozen classmates and maybe one or two bullies, and you have them for 7 or 8 hours a day. That's not good, but teachers can address that. Being on social media and having a cell phone in your pocket means that you're exposed to the entire world, not a few dozen classmates. and you're not exposed to them for 8 hours a day. You're exposed for them 24 hours a day. And you don't have teachers or parents looking over your shoulder to know what you're doing. So I strongly support what Governor Sanders has done in our state, and I'm glad to see more states following Arkansas's lead. So those are a few of the solutions I would have to try to reduce as much of the harm for our kids on social media as possible, while also recognizing that that we all have First Amendment right to access social media, and there's a lot of good that comes from it as well. And a lot of people enjoy being on it, especially adults who are using it for helpful and, like I said, even fun purposes.
Chris?
Well, first and foremost, I'm very thankful that I live in America where we have the First Amendment.
Yeah.
It allows us to have these products. What you're going to do with them is the real question, and he addressed a lot of that. I think at the heart of her question, though, was she sees the harmful destruction that's happening to our country with everybody walking around cell phones. You see people walking into walls because they're glued to the cell phones. You see parents ignoring their children glued to the cell phones. It's a terrible problem, and society is going to have to figure out how to deal with it. But ultimately, like so many problems, it begins in the home, right? I know people who hand a cell phone to the children at 3 or 4 years old so they can entertain them, so they don't have to do the hard things of reading books, of spending time with their children. And that's, there's so many problems like that in our country that really you cannot legislate. You can't legislate spending time with your children, or you can't tell people, well, you can't let your kids have a phone. You can't let them have access to information. That starts at the house. You can. I don't care how badly they cry. You can tell them you can't have a phone till you're 13 or 15. Or you can have it for 1 hour in my presence, right? These are all things that you can do, but that's not something that the government can legislate. That's got to come from, and it all kind of goes back to the same thing. In a Christ-filled home, you're gonna look after these things. You're not gonna let your kids have access to a box where you can look at anything you want in the world, all the pornography you want, all the propaganda you want, the transgenderism, whatever you want is right there. So if you let your children have access to that, you're going to have these problems. That begins at home.
Yep. Great point. I agree with you 100%. I think, we talked about root cause. Boy, if there was some, and I mean, I can't think creatively how you can legislate for people to be good parents, and for, a man to stay in the house and be a good husband, for a wife to stay in the house and be a good wife. You can't legislate that. That's something that they have to take on themselves. And, if we could do that, if we could fix the family problem, we wouldn't be talking about a whole bunch of problems here, because everything else would kind of fall into place.
That's a pretty easy fix. You just get everybody back to Christ.
That is, that's, and that is the easy answer if we could get them to do that. So, for a couple of the points there, Senator Cotton talked about, right here locally, Arkansas, bell to bell, no cell. We led the march on that, and I'm on the education committee. So happy to support that, excited to. In fact, I see the results of it already. So I'm at school, a couple schools here recently. I asked the questions. I asked the youth, what are your thoughts? Because after I'm talking to them about civic duty, civic responsibility, I open up the floor, figuring that's going to be one of the hot topics. And of course, there's some questions. But what's interesting is, and it reinforces what I heard on the news one day. But one young student brought up, they wished that the cell phones were allowed at lunchtime, because right now all they can do is talk to their friend. And I was like, that's exactly right. And really, if you heard on the news, that's what one of the folks at the schools here locally said, was when they go into the lunchroom now, it's loud, and it's not kids yelling at each other, screaming at each other. They're having communication, conversations. They're actually talking. There's just enough kids talking, enough students talking, that it's louder. It's like the schools used to be years ago. So, to me, I love that. And one student had a great question, question issue she brought up. It was a young lady. She brought up, the fact that they can't have them at like functions in the gym, homecoming, different things like that. And I told her, I said, that was a great question. And that question actually came up in committee. We talked about that in committee, because that was somebody that had on the committee had a concern. So I was like, you're thinking like an adult. You're starting to think like an adult like that. And that's what we want to see. We want to see youth thinking like adults and not staring at their phone. And it's working. And I love to see it. So,
well, how many times have we witnessed people sitting, and it can be children or adults, sitting in a room, and every one of them are sitting there on their phone, and there's no conversation. And come to find out, some of them are texting each other back and forth across the room rather than having a conversation face to face.
Yep.
You know, but anyway, okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you watching, we apologize for this being a little bit longer tonight, but we felt like this was important to get Senator Cotton's words out there to as many people as possible. And his people did apologize because they had some technical issues with the texting out for the phone, for the dial-in. So they apologized for that. One other thing is the last question that someone asked, was about lowering property taxes. And Senator Cotton did address that, but as we all know, that is a state issue not to be addressed at the federal level. So with that said, we're going to go to our last question here. Gary.
I'll go to Edward King.
Thank you, Senator Cotton, for your service to our country. I've heard a lot of people asking what you are going to do. I would kind of like to know, as your supporter, as Senator Bozeman's supporter, and as a supporter of President Trump's agenda, what can we best do as your supporters to help you and President Trump complete your agenda? Thank you.
Well, Edward, thanks very much for the kind reversal of the question. For once, I appreciate that. There's a lot you can do. I would encourage you to get active in your community, especially active in your local Republican Party. We talked earlier with Chris up front about helping kids get involved. You should get involved yourself if you're not involved. Maybe get involved in your county's Republican committee. If you don't have one, get one going. It's very important come elections for people like me or John Bozeman, Rick Crawford, your local officials and your state legislators as well, to have an active and engaged committee that can help them reach voters, put up signs, make phone calls, get people to polls, so on and so forth. So if you're not active in local Republican politics, I would encourage you to get active. If you have the time and you have the ability and the inclination, consider running for office yourself. We have a great legislature. We have a great governor. You probably heard me mention them several times on the phone. I can tell you that's not always the case. I've got colleagues who have a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature, or they just have Republicans they don't get along with. We have great state and local officials. It makes my job a lot easier if we have good people who are serving in the state house and in the courthouse and who can work with me and my team. So if you're so inclined, if you want to take the plunge, I can promise you that the water is fine. And it's a very rewarding kind of work to be able to get up every day and saying, I'm helping my fellow Arkansans, I'm helping my fellow Americans have a better, safer, more prosperous life for themselves and their family and their communities. So I really do encourage good people to get involved in politics. We need more of it. And finally, I'd say where we started out with Charlie Kirk as well, please, pray for all of our leaders, even pray for the Democrats. Maybe they need it more than anyone, but pray for all of us to have the wisdom and the courage and the steadfastness that we need to understand the right course of action, to be able to take that course of action, whatever the consequences, and do what you've elected us to do to help represent the very best interests and aspirations you all have for our state and have for our nation. So thanks very much. I appreciate the question, Edward.
Chris?
So I'll say straight out forward what Tom didn't say. Your donations. Candidates need your donations. They got to buy signs. They got to buy stickers. They got to pay for advertising. So I really think that he didn't really emphasize that point, for good reason. So I'll say it for him. He needs your money. But more than that, volunteering. If you've got a candidate that you're really enthusiastic about, volunteer to go door to door. It's the foot soldiers that win a campaign. So, that's really where you have to get involved. If you don't know how to do all that, if that's all confusing to you, you can always join the Baxter County Republican Committee. We'll help steer you in the right direction, help get you in touch with candidates, help you find out who all the candidates are and get to know them. So definitely volunteering and donations are what most candidates really need to win their elections.
Great point. Great. And I appreciate you saying that, because folks that have never been, I never was in politics before, and it feels weird to ask, for money. It's not natural to say, hey, when people say, how can I help? It's not natural. But there is
money.
Yeah, there is a lot of expense and a lot more than, I ever would have imagined. But, to your point, I had a young man just recently, just got out of the service, he's over here using his GI Bill, going to get a certification, but he wants to get involved. And so I'm going to connect him with ways he can get involved. And then he's asked me, how can I, just get involved, possibly door knocking, things like that. And so I'll steer him in that direction, get him involved with, Republican committees, so that he can, get out there and, Senator Cotton did mention it. Number one, you've got to vote. You've got to register to vote. That's the number one thing that you need to do. If you're not registered to vote, you need to get registered and go vote. For the other thing, get involved, whether that's, school board, whether that's, running for office or supporting somebody that's running for office. That's another way to do it. Instead of just sitting back and complaining about things that you don't think are right, get out and do something about them and fix them. And then when they're looking for volunteers, when they're asking for volunteers to help set things up, volunteer. You said you wanted to see things change to the better. You wanted to help out. Show it. Put your money where your mouth is. Put your work out there and do it.
Yeah, that's so true. And the thing about it is, most of us don't know how politics really works. I hear people complain about the candidates. Well, we just always end up with the worst darn candidates. Well, have you ever voted in a primary? That's useless. It's not worth my time. That's where your selection goes through. If you're just waiting to the general election, you're just voting on someone else's candidate.
That's right.
You didn't exercise your freedom of choice there.
Mm-hmm.
The Baxter County Republican Committee, just by the way, happens to meet tomorrow night at 6 o'clock at the VFW. So if you would like to get involved, here's a golden opportunity, and you don't have to wait around a long time to get involved. You can start tomorrow night.
There you go.
With that being said, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow night.
Russ,
Jason,
thank
you very much.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for tonight. Thank you very much for tuning in. Get some different chairs.
I think when I kind of looked over at Chris, I figured it was about at the 45-minute mark.